Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. Danny and I were questioned repeatedly about the fight, what led up to it, and who threw the first punch. The officers seemed almost thrilled to have a sheriff's deputy involved in the incident. About 30 minutes later, a royal blue Ford F-150 crew cab pulled into the lot, and I saw Danny take a deep breath as he recognized the driver. It was Pat Quinn, the sheriff of Mason County. He walked straight over to where Danny and I were standing by one of the ambulances. Danny opened his mouth to speak, but Pat shot him a stern look and said, "Not now." Pat approached Captain Sturgeon. "So what's the story, Pete?" "Well, it looks like one of your deputies was involved in an altercation tonight," Sturgeon replied. "Yes, it seems that way," Pat said, clearly annoyed. "What do you have so far on how it started?" "Two of the guys are on their way to the hospital. Seems your deputy and his friend worked them over pretty good. The other three say Randy was provoked by Anderson and your deputy." "I hope you thought to get Danny's side of the story," Pete Quinn said, obviously irritated. "We're going to get everyone's statements to ascertain exactly what happened," Pat replied. "Trust me, I know how law enforcement works," Pete shot back. "Yeah, well, I'm going inside to talk to the manager," Pat said, walking toward the door. "What good is the manager going to do? She was inside the whole time. You see those little bubble-like things on the corners of the buildings? Those are video cameras. I'm guessing at least one of them caught the whole incident on tape. I'd also bet there are cameras inside that captured whatever led up to this." Pete seemed momentarily flustered. "Yeah, I know there are cameras, but we still have to get statements." "Well, you might save yourself some time by asking the manager to check the video and audio," Pat suggested as he entered the building. "Tell you what, Pete, I'll go ahead and do it for you," Pat added, shaking his head. The group of patrol officers, a sergeant and a lieutenant, stifled giggles, embarrassed by their captain's oversight. It was clear they hadn't noticed the cameras either. I hadn't until Pat pointed them out. To a casual observer, they blended in with the building's exterior lights. Sturgeon grudgingly followed Pat inside the restaurant. They were in there for nearly 30 minutes, and my hand was growing increasingly painful. Finally, Sturgeon and Quinn emerged. "We've decided to charge Randy Jones, Wade Ryan, and the rest of their buddies with assault, public intoxication, and disorderly conduct," Sturgeon announced. Danny and I were informed we wouldn't face any charges, but were cautioned not to get our hopes up, as the investigation would continue. The possibility of disorderly conduct charges still loomed over us. Danny was optimistic, believing we wouldn't be charged, but I was anxious. By the time everything was wrapped up, it was nearly midnight. Randy and Wade would learn of their arrest at the hospital. We had each undergone a breathalyzer test. Danny and I registered as 0.04 and 0.05, well below the legal limit, while the others tested between 0.15 and 0.20. "Are you guys proud of yourselves?" Quinn asked as he approached us. "Pat, it wasn't our fault," Danny tried to explain. "I know," Quinn replied. "I saw the tapes. You two were provoked inside the restaurant and let those idiots follow you all the way to the parking lot, leading to a physical altercation. The part that was your fault was not having the common sense to call a cop when they started to follow you out here. What did you think was going to happen?" Danny and I exchanged glances, unable to muster a defense. "Guys like that," Pat continued, "are only looking for one thing, a reaction. And you gave it to them." "Look, Pat," Danny started, but Quinn cut him off. "Don't even start with me. How do you think I'm going to explain to people that one of my deputies was in a bar drinking, then got into a very public confrontation and ended up drawing his own firearm during it? Oh God, Pat, the guy drew a knife on me. I had legitimate reason to fear for my life." "I know, Danny. If we're being technical, you probably would have been justified in using your weapon. But would that make you feel any better?" Danny, looking chastened, replied, "No. It's my fault, Sheriff," I chimed in, hoping to deflect some of Quinn's ire from Danny. "It's both your faults," Quinn corrected. "How do you think Chief Van Dyke is going to react when he hears about this? Think he'll give you a big pat on the back?" "Definitely not," I said sheepishly. "My boss, Chief Gerald Van Dyke, was obsessively concerned with the department's image, and I could be facing a suspension regardless of whether I was charged. You didn't think about that detail, did you? Quinn continued. I'm sure I'll have to pay a hefty overtime bill to cover your shifts for the next few weeks. All right, Pat, you made your point, Danny interrupted. We got goaded into a fight, but it wasn't just some random bar brawl. This guy had it out for Dalton. He confronted us the moment they walked in and was being a jerk from the start. I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. I had been in a relationship with Darla Jones for over 6 months. She had been living with him for about 3 months, he said, glancing at me. Yeah, a little over 4, I replied. Danny continued, Darla and Randy were getting a divorce and were only a month away from finalizing it. Then Randy comes back to town, makes all kinds of overtures, and starts sleeping with Darla behind Dalton's back. She ended up leaving Dalton to go back to Randy. Tonight was just Randy throwing it in Dalton's face, trying to make him look weak in front of the whole restaurant. I winced at Danny's word choice, but I noticed Sheriff Quinn did too. He started to calm down, rubbing his face, and the tension seemed to dissipate. Randy Jones, Randy Jones, Randy Jones, Quinn said, shaking his head as he paced. You know who he is? I asked. Hell yes, I know who Randy Jones is. He's an idiot. Christ, I gave that guy his first OWI about 6 years ago when I was still with Red River PD. Danny and I chuckled a bit. Look, guys, Quinn said, now calmer, I'm going to step down from my soapbox. People like Randy Jones are only good at provoking others and getting a reaction. I expect you, Danny, to be better than that. I know Chief Van Dyke expects more from you too. Dalton, you both are the good guys here. People like them would love nothing more than to bring you down to their level. You have something to lose, not Randy and his friends. Okay, I get it, I said. Danny, take Dalton over to the emergency department to get that hand looked at, Quinn instructed. Will do, Pat, Danny replied as I handed him the keys to my car, knowing he was in better shape to drive. Before we could leave, Quinn approached my vehicle again. I rolled down the passenger side window. Just one more thing, Dalton, Quinn started. I know you said your relationship with Darla Jones was over, but have you considered how all of this might affect her? Honestly, no, and I don't really care, I admitted. I told her the day she left that I wasn't going to be her backup plan. I warned her it was just a matter of time before Randy fell off the wagon. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long. Yeah, me too, Pat said. But you want to know something? My ex-wife and I didn't end our marriage on good terms either. We got even less friendly after the divorce. But even after everything, I still care about Clarissa. I bet you probably still care about Darla too. So, if I were you, I'd be concerned about how tonight's events might impact her and the kids. They have 2, a boy and a girl, I replied. You and Danny did a number on Randy and his friends tonight. Once Randy sobers up and gets bailed out, how do you think he'll feel knowing he got beaten up by his wife's lover? Just some food for thought. I'd keep an eye on Darla and the kids in case Randy goes off the rails. Oh God, I hadn't thought of that. I'll do that, Sheriff, I promised. Hey Sheriff, do you think there's still a chance that Danny and I could get charged with disorderly conduct? Not a chance, Quinn smiled. You sure? What if the PD asks the county attorney for charges? They seemed awfully eager to get a deputy in trouble tonight. Quinn laughed. Don't worry about that for 1 second, Dalton. I can be pretty persuasive with the county attorney. If I say you won't be charged, then you won't be charged. After that, Danny drove me to the emergency department, where an x-ray confirmed I had a broken third metacarpal, the bone just below my right middle finger. They put a cast on it, and I'd be off work for the next 6 to 8 weeks. Fortunately, we had short-term disability through the city, so I wouldn't have to go without pay. Needless to say, Quinn was right. Chief Van Dyke was not happy. He didn't suspend me but did issue a formal reprimand, which meant I would be suspended without pay if I incurred any further disciplinary action in the next 2 years, whether on duty or off. Fortunately, my union got involved and filed a grievance on my behalf. The physical and video evidence proved I hadn't instigated the altercation, and a civil service board hearing was convened, resolving the matter in my favor. Chief Van Dyke grumbled about it but accepted the decision. The entire affair gave me some time off for the rest of July and a good chunk of August. I tried to stay busy with projects around the house. I could still mow my lawn without much trouble and worked on a few other projects as well. My scheduled shifts at Eagle Star were canceled for the next couple of months, with relatively little hassle. One of the full-time flight paramedics, Alex Trotman, was more than happy to pick up some overtime along with the rest of the crew. Even though I wasn't allowed to work at RFD while on sick leave, I decided to answer the pager for the Royal Fork Fire and Rescue for medical calls only, as long as I didn't try to lift any patients. We had a solid crew that always responded to calls, and it was rare for us to have fewer than 4 or 5 people show up. In late July, we were in the middle of an intense heat wave. Temperatures hovered in the mid-90s, which isn't so bad compared to some places in the Southwest, but in the upper Midwest, the humidity was consistently 85% and higher. When it's that humid, you can sweat but it won't evaporate, leaving you feeling warm and sticky, definitely not in a good way. July had not been a good month for Randy Jones. He had indeed been charged with assault, public intoxication, and disorderly conduct, and he was missing a few teeth. He was probably going to serve a minimum of 30 days in jail, and possibly up to 60, depending on whether his court-appointed attorney could get the charges reduced. The public intoxication charge would only land him a night in jail, but Randy was also facing the very real possibility of losing his lucrative welding job with one of the oil companies up north, where he was making about $50 an hour. He had been staying in company-provided housing for a week at a time, working 12 to 16-hour days and making good money, but he was spending it just as quickly. Darla and the kids were still in the same apartment building they had occupied before the divorce was filed, so it was clear Randy hadn't improved their financial situation much. The combination of the insufferable heat and his personal and legal problems created a volatile situation. Anyone in EMS or law enforcement could tell you that domestic assaults tend to spike during heat waves. On that Friday afternoon, the temperature was still 96 degrees Fahrenheit with 95% humidity, making the day absolutely unbearable. Our aging town pool had to turn people away due to the overwhelming number of those seeking relief with a swim. Around 4:30 p.m., the pager went off. Royal Fork Fire and Rescue, you are needed for a medical response at 431 4th Avenue Northeast for a female patient who has been assaulted. Mason County deputies and State Patrol have also been dispatched. Time of call is 16:27. That was Darla's parents' house. I grabbed my keys and jumped in my car, speeding to the fire station on Main Street. The ambulance was already out front with emergency lights flashing. I quickly hopped aboard, where Jake Herman was our driver. Meg and Diana were on board, along with Misty Kafir, another volunteer EMT. I sat up front with Jake, manning the radio. Mason County Dispatch, this is Royal Fork Rescue Adam 401. You can show us en route to 431 4th Avenue Northeast. We'll be staging approximately 2 blocks away until you advise that law enforcement is on the scene. 104, Adam 401. Mason County Deputy 17 to 15 is almost on scene and will advise when it is safe to approach. Copy, Adam 401. It took us less than 2 minutes to arrive in the area, and my stomach felt like it was filled with butterflies. Dispatch, Adam 401 is in the area. Please advise when we can approach. Copy, Adam 401, 17 to 15 advises that the suspect has left the residence and it is safe to approach. 10 to 4, dispatch. You can show us on scene. We quickly sped the last 2 blocks until we pulled up in front of Darla's parents' house, a typical ranch home with a 1-car garage, in decent condition. Darla's dad, Butch Kent, had worked at the town lumber yard his whole life. He wasn't wealthy, but he did well enough for his family. Danny greeted me as we approached the house, shaking his head as I walked up the front porch steps. Inside, I saw Butch and Cecilia, Darla's mom, weeping and kneeling by the sofa next to their daughter. My heart sank as I took in Darla's battered and bruised body. Darla's left eye was completely swollen shut, and she had a nasty open cut above her left eyebrow that had bled badly. Her left cheek appeared swollen and misshapen. Her bottom lip had been injured so severely that it had punctured through, and she bore numerous bruises and abrasions on her forearms, indicating she had done her best to defend herself. Her right wrist was badly broken, bent at an unnatural angle. Darla was also clutching her ribs and abdomen, clearly having been struck multiple times. "Butch, Cecilia, can either of you tell me what happened?" I asked gently. "That son of a Randy." Butch sobbed. "Cecilia and I were gone for just a couple of hours, and he came over here and hurt her. Suddenly, it hit me. We're Natalie and Nathan. They're next door playing," Cecilia sobbed. "At least he had the sense not to do this in front of them." I began examining Darla from head to toe. There didn't appear to be any cerebrospinal fluid leaking from her ears, and there was no bruising behind them, which could have indicated a severe head injury. Both of her pupils were equal but dilated as I gently opened her eyelids. It was clear she had a concussion and didn't immediately recognize me. There was well-defined bruising forming around her neck, indicating she had been subjected to serious abuse. Darla's chest had deep bruises on both sides. I listened carefully to her lungs and was relieved to hear good airflow on both sides. She flinched slightly when I gently examined her abdomen, but I could hear normal bowel sounds in all quadrants, suggesting there was likely no internal bleeding. I didn't want to expose her too much in front of her parents, but I needed to check her entire chest. I gently lifted her t-shirt, only to be startled by what I saw, markings on her skin that were clearly indicative of violence. I quickly put her shirt back down, realizing that Butch would have been furious and likely would have sought out Randy. "Let's get the cot in here and prepare for transport," I instructed the rest of the crew. Jake and Misty went to the ambulance to retrieve the cot while Meg and Diana monitored Darla's vital signs. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated at 145/95, her pulse was 55, and her respirations were between 8 and 10 per minute, indicators that she might have a closed head injury. However, it could also be temporary due to the concussion. We wouldn't know for sure until she had a CT scan at the hospital. Her oxygen saturation was 97%, which was reassuring. We gently moved Darla from the sofa to the cot and secured her in place. She whimpered slightly as we did so, but we quickly got her into the ambulance and prepared to leave. Jay jumped back up front to drive while Meg, Diana, Misty, and I took care of Darla in the back. I grabbed the 4 kit and started in 4 in her right hand, thankful for my left-handedness, which allowed me to work efficiently. A good sign was when Darla began to wake, opening her right eye as I inserted the needle. Darla seemed lucid for a few moments as I started the 4, but a horrified look crossed her face when she recognized me. She appeared humiliated and embarrassed to be seen this way, immediately closing her one good eye and turning her head to the left to look away. "Darla, can you hear me okay?" I asked softly. She didn't respond verbally, only nodding her head yes as tears began to fall. "This is only going to sting a little bit until I get the 4 in, okay?" She winced as I carefully advanced the needle, hitting a good vein in her left hand, which rewarded me with a quick flash of blood in the 4 catheter. I removed the metal stylus, applied pressure to the vein, and attached the 4 tubing, starting a slow drip of normal saline. Diana applied the patches from our cardiac monitor, which showed that Darla's heart rate had increased to around 70 beats per minute, and her blood pressure had improved to 132/88. I continued to ask her questions as I treated her during the ride to the hospital. I took a bottle of sterile water, wet a washcloth, and gently cleaned some of the blood from her lips, nose, and eyes. We also applied a splint to her right wrist, which was clearly broken, but thankfully she still had a good pulse and color in her right hand. Darla responded to my questions by tenderly shaking or nodding her head, continuing to cry softly and refusing to look at me, and felt completely helpless to do more to alleviate her pain and suffering. Suddenly, it became clear that my confrontation with Randy just a few weeks ago had played a large part in what happened to Darla. I began to feel immense shame, but it was obvious that Darla felt an even greater degree of shame, embarrassment, and humiliation. Everything I had predicted would happen with Randy had come to pass. For some reason, I couldn't help myself. I stood up from my seat, straddled the lower end of the ambulance cot, and sat down facing Darla. I gently lifted her legs and scooted closer, unbuckling the belts that secured her to the cot. I helped her to a sitting position, which was awkward due to the soft splint on my own right hand. I carefully placed Darla's injured right arm behind my back and softly pulled her into my embrace. Darla immediately buried her head in my shoulder, being mindful of her swollen, wounded left eye, and began sobbing uncontrollably. I said nothing, just looked forward towards the front of the ambulance and held Darla, doing my best to let her know that at least for the moment, she was safe. "Oh God, Dalton," she sobbed, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." She continued to wail, and I could feel the tears welling up in my own eyes. The other 3 girls in the back of the ambulance said nothing, just watching us, their eyes filling with tears. Diana and Misty had to cover their mouths to keep from sobbing. I nodded to Meg and asked her to please make a quick report to the hospital to let them know we were getting close, which she did. I continued to hold Darla, gently soothing her and telling her everything would be all right. By the time we reached the hospital, she had calmed somewhat but was still whimpering from time to time. I rose from the cot, gently laying her back down and securing the cot straps back in place. I took her left hand in mine as we wheeled her from the ambulance into the emergency department at Holy Family Medical Center. We gently slid her from our cot to the bed. Shelley Staines, the nurse in the ER, took charge of Darla as we wheeled her in, and I could see the look of shock and horror on Shelley's face, dumbfounded at the kind of monster who could do this to someone they professed to love, someone who was the mother of their own children. 30-year-old female, personal physician, Dr. Laughlin, victim of an assault. No blood or CSF present in the ears. Obvious right wrist fracture, severe laceration and swelling to the left eye, and a puncture wound to the bottom lip. Heavy bruising to both sides of the ribs. Abdomen is soft, lung sounds and bowel sounds are all clear and present. There are bite marks on both sides of the chest. I could see and hear Shelley gasp as I said that. 18-gauge Ford in the left hand with normal saline running TKO. "Did you give her anything for pain?" Shelley asked. "Negative. Good chance she has a concussion at a minimum, and we didn't want to suppress the CNS any further." "Okay, Dalton, thanks. I'll take it from here," Shelley said as she started getting Darla settled in. I turned and looked back into the room as Darla weakly called out to me, "Please don't leave me. Will you please stay with me?" I didn't know what to do or say. "Your mom and dad are both on their way to the hospital. In fact, they're probably here right now. Your kids are going to stay at the house next to your parents." "I don't care, Dalton. Will you stay with me? Please don't go." "I have to go, Darla. I need to return with the ambulance to write the report and help get it back in service. I'm sorry, but I really can't stay." Darla started crying again as I gently pulled my hand away from hers and walked to the door of the room. I gave her one last look before leaving, suddenly feeling like the biggest jerk in the world. I couldn't stand to look at her beaten body anymore. I couldn't bear the shame. I walked back out to the ambulance garage and saw the rest of the crew just finishing up getting the ambulance put back in order. I had grabbed the necessary paperwork and hospital insurance forms and set them on the front passenger seat. It dawned on me that Jake, Misty, Meg, and Diana were all staring at me. "What?" I asked, somewhat annoyed. "Dalton, can we talk?" Diana asked. I put down the paperwork and followed her outside, around the corner from the ambulance garage. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "What do you mean, what am I doing?" "I'm helping get the ambulance back in service." "Yeah, I can see that, but why?" "Because the call is over and it's time to go home," I said. "You need to get back in there and be with her, Dalton. Her parents will be here any minute now, and she's got plenty of family and friends who can take care of her from here on out. You know she needs you more than anyone else right now. Don't deny it. What do you want me to do?" "What I want is for you to step up, Dalton. All of us saw what happened in the back of that ambulance on the way in here. The best thing you could have done for her today is exactly what you did, just be there for her. Holding her like that was the best support she could have gotten. Well, I did it, and now it's time to go home." Diana said, "You don't get off that easy. What more do you expect? Dalton, you're part of the reason for why this happened. I do not accept that, and you have no business trying to put that on me. Oh God, I don't control Randy Jones." "Oh, come off it, Dalton. You and Danny confronted Randy and his friends a few weeks ago. They were charged, while you all got off scot-free. Today, Randy finds out he might lose his job but can't leave because he's out on bail. He sees you as the source of his problems and connects it all back to you. Are you getting it yet? Yes, I get it, Diana, but that doesn't make any of this my fault. It might not be all your fault, Dalton, but you can't deny you have some responsibility for this. Oh yeah? If you want to put it that way, then this all traces back to the day Darla left me, leaving me in tears as she packed up and left with Randy again. Diana tried to compose herself. Yes, I know, Dalton. I know she hurt you. We were all disappointed when she decided to go back to him. We all hurt for you too. But all of that is water under the bridge. You saw what he did to her today. You know he's a monster. Yes, it's a chain reaction of events, but you're part of that chain. Right now, she needs you more than anything. I have to go back, Diana. I still have a report to write on this. Oh, for goodness sake, Dalton, give me the paperwork. I can write the report just as well as anyone. I know your password to the computer. I'll type it up and sign your name. I turned and shook my head. If I didn't get out of there, I felt like I was going to explode. Forget it. Let's just go. I can always come back later. I turned around and walked back into the garage. It was clear that Jake, Misty, and Meg had been listening to the whole conversation. They stood there, looking disapproving. I took a seat in the front passenger seat. Jake was about to turn the key when he paused. On second thought, he said, I think I'll ride in the back with the girls. He got out from behind the wheel and jumped in the back with Meg, Diana, and Misty. I sat there, dumbfounded. They were all upset with me, and they made it clear. I got out and walked around to the other side of the ambulance, hopped in, and turned the key. It felt a bit awkward driving with the splint on my right hand, but I managed. Anyone want to stop for a beverage or food on the way back? It was customary to grab something after a run to Red River Falls, but the silence I received was answer enough. I could have used a nice cold drink right about then, but I didn't want to make things worse by stopping. Besides, they probably would have left me there if I didn't take the keys in with me. Needless to say, it was an extremely quiet 40-minute ride back to Royal Fork. I helped restock the ambulance in silence along with everyone else. As soon as that was finished, Meg, Diana, Misty, and Jake all disappeared like shadows, leaving me alone at the fire station to finish the run report. I got home another half hour later and grabbed a beer from the fridge, deciding I wouldn't be answering any more EMS calls that night. It was for the best, given how my fellow volunteers obviously looked at me. I slumped into my favorite recliner and flipped on the TV, hoping to catch the Twins or Red Sox game. But even with the noise of the TV and a cold drink in my hand, nothing could help me escape the reality that my house felt even emptier than when Darla and the kids left. I began to wonder if the day would ever come when I didn't feel this way anymore. My phone rang early the next morning. It was one of those mornings where I just didn't want to get up, but I begrudgingly reached over and picked up the receiver. Hello? Dalton? Yeah, who's this? This is Cecilia. Ah, hi Cecilia, I said, sitting up in bed. How are you? I am fine, Dalton, but I'm not the one you should be worried about. How's Darla? I asked, taking the bait. She has surgery scheduled for this morning. She asked me to call you and see if you could be there. Surgery? For what? Randy really did a number on her wrist. He managed to break it in 3 places when he stomped on her with his work boots. They scheduled her for 10 o'clock. I ran my hand over my face in frustration. Well, I'm not really sure I can make it by then, I said, glancing at the clock. Cecilia said, sounding stern, Darla really needs you there. You're the one man who has ever stood up for her. I'm also part of the reason she was hurt yesterday. I can only imagine how upset you and Butch are with me right now. Stop it, Dalton. Get off your pity pot right now. Randy has deserved to face consequences for years. I'm surprised it took this long. You may have played a role in what led up to this, but you didn't make Randy do what he did. That was his choice. Now, what time can we expect to see you? I let out a sigh of frustration. Let me get cleaned up and grab some coffee and breakfast. I'll be over there as soon as I can. Thanks, Dalton. This will mean a lot to her. I know. I hung up and proceeded to take a shower, which was much easier these days with the splint on my right hand that I could just take on and off instead of the plaster cast I had for 3 weeks after I had confronted Randy Jones. It was almost 9 o'clock by the time I hit the road. I figured Darla's hand must have been seriously injured if they were concerned enough to schedule surgery for a Saturday morning. Hopefully, there wouldn't be too much nerve or circulation damage, and she'd regain full use of her hand. I got to the hospital too late to see Darla before they took her back. Cecilia said Darla was disappointed I wasn't there yet, but seemed happier when Cecilia told her I was on my way. Maybe part of me was subconsciously putting off the visit and avoiding seeing her. The surgery took about an hour and a half. I sat in the waiting room while Cecilia and Butch went back to see her. When she made it back to recovery, they were in there for about 20 minutes before Cecilia came out and asked if I'd like to come back and see her. No, I think I'll be fine waiting out here. It's fine, Dalton. They only allow 2 at a time anyway. You and Butch can spend some time with her back there. I know it would mean a lot to her to know you were here. If I go back there, Cecilia, I'd kind of like to see her alone. I understand, she nodded. She went back to the recovery area, and she and Butch emerged a few minutes later. Go on back, Dalton, Butch said. She's still pretty out of it, but she'll at least know you're there. I kind of half hoped they wouldn't be back for a while. Truthfully, I should have just taken the opportunity to leave when they went back to see her in the first place. But I got up and walked through the double doors, greeted by the nurse who led me to the recovery room. I was probably lucky to see her at all. Many hospitals don't allow visitors in recovery. Darla was still sleeping. They had managed to skillfully close the wound above her left eye. Hopefully, the scar would blend in with her eyebrow. The large hole in her bottom lip was also neatly closed, and her right hand and wrist were wrapped in an ace bandage with a soft splint in place. I assumed a cast would be put on in the coming days. I found it ironic that we both happened to have injuries to our right hands. I stood there for almost 20 minutes, just staring at her. There was a time when I admired her small stature and charm, but now the simple act of reaching down to hold her hand sent a cold shiver through me, and I immediately let go for fear of causing her more pain. As I did, Darla stirred and asked who was there. I said nothing and decided it was time to go. I couldn't bear to look at her any longer, knowing I had a part in what put her there. Tears began streaming down my face, not from sadness but from shame. I walked back out to the waiting area and found Butch and Cecilia still sitting there. They asked if anything was wrong, and I said no. I fibbed and told them she was stirring a bit and asking for them. They both smiled and got up to head back to the recovery room. I was just about to reach the end of the hall when I punched the elevator call button and heard Butch behind me. Dalton, wait up a second. I turned to see him rushing toward me. Dalton, I just wanted to say that Cecilia and I really appreciate everything you've done for Darla. Yeah, right, I said, fighting tears again. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, stepping inside the elevator, that I'm partly to blame for why she isn't here in the first place. Much to my surprise, Butch stepped inside with me. Now listen to me, Dalton. This is not your fault. Yes, it is, Butch. I'm surprised you and Cecilia can even stand to look at me right now. I let Randy provoke me, and he took it out on Darla. Yes, he did, Dalton, but you're the first one that's ever stood up to him. He knows you're not going to let him push you around. If I were 20 or 25 years younger and in better health, I would have handled it myself. My friend's boss was right, I said, shaking my head. He even warned me this would happen, I just didn't listen. The elevator opened on the main level, and I started walking toward the front entrance with Butch following close behind. Cecilia and I tried hard to talk Darla out of going on a date with that guy, but she wouldn't listen. I know how stubborn she can be. But if you give her another chance, she won't let you down again. I don't know, Butch. I think I've caused enough damage. It's time for me to fade back into the background. I turned toward him, shook his hand quickly, and started walking faster to my car. Butch, with his bad hip, could never keep up. Darla got out of the hospital the following day. The only reason they kept her another night was that her blood pressure was a little low after the surgery. She ended up going back to her parents' house for a few days. The problem was that no one seemed to know where Randy Jones was. An all-points bulletin had been released along with a be on the lookout for his vehicle. Everyone decided it was in Darla's best interest to find a safer place to stay. Cahan Manufacturing graciously gave her a leave of absence until she got everything sorted out. Unfortunately, she wouldn't be paid, but at least she wouldn't lose her job. A few weeks later, Darla and the kids moved into the Karen Cumberland House, a modern, secure women's shelter in Red River Falls. The facility had complete video monitoring and panic alarms throughout, allowing residents to quickly call law enforcement without needing to dial 911. Any panic alarm would send police rushing to the specific area of the building. Heavy reinforced doors and bullet-resistant windows made it nearly as secure as a prison, designed to keep threats out rather than in. There was also a secure room at the entrance where visitors could wait for a resident, and they could be searched before entering. I returned to work at the fire department shortly after Darla and the kids moved in. My hands still hurt from time to time, but I could lift patients and perform all my paramedic skills with little to no trouble. I mostly avoided Darla since she got out of the hospital. It hurt too much to see her because she left me, but I also had to accept my part in her getting hurt. I tried to deflect responsibility when people called me out on it. I guess I didn't want them to think I was a bigger jerk than necessary. Eventually, I found the courage to visit her, so I drove over to the Cumberland House after one of my shifts. I brought gifts for Natalie and Nathan and a nice bouquet of flowers for Darla, steering clear of roses and opting for lots of carnations. I wasn't sure what sentiment I was trying to avoid expressing, but it felt like the right choice at the time. I walked in the front entrance and rang the buzzer at the security door. A small opening similar to a mail slot opened, and I could see the eyes of an African-American woman staring back at me. I knew someone inside could see me on the video camera as well, so she probably knew I wasn't a threat before she opened the slot. "What do you want?" she demanded in a thick accent. "I'd like to see Darla Jones if possible," I replied, a bit sheepishly. "Darla know you're looking for her?" "Well, no, not really." "You're supposed to call ahead if you want to see somebody," she warned. "Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I guess I can come back then. Can I just leave the flowers and gifts with you?" She eyed me. "What kind of uniform is that you're wearing?" "My uniform? Oh, well, I work for the Red River Falls Fire Department." "You kind of look like a cop." I laughed. "No, I'm definitely not a cop." "See here," I said, pointing to the patch on my right sleeve. "That's the patch of the Red River Falls Fire Department." She mumbled. "You still look like the police." "What's your name, anyway?" "Dalton. Dalton Anderson." "Wait right there," she said, closing the slot. I could hear her call out on the intercom system, "Hey, Darla Jones, there's some firemen here for you." Kind of cute for a white boy too. I felt my face turn beet red as I could hear the women inside hollering and whistling at the announcement. Soon, a loud buzzing came from the door, indicating it was unlocked, and I proceeded to let myself in. On the other side stood Darla. She looked great, well, at least a lot better than the last time I saw her. There was just a slight scar above her left eyebrow and another below her lip where she had been injured. All the bruising on her cheeks and neck had faded, and the only visible reminder of her ordeal was the removable cast on her right forearm. "Hi," I breathed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hi yourself," she said, smiling. We hugged awkwardly and briefly, mostly because of the flowers and gifts I was carrying, but also because we were unsure of each other. "I just thought I'd drop by on my way home from work and say hi to you and the kids," I said, trying to sound casual. "That's so sweet, Dalton." "They've really missed you," she replied, visibly fidgeting with her hands. Can we go see the kids?" "I have some presents for them." "Sure, they'll be thrilled." "They're upstairs in the playroom." Darla led me into the great room, which served as a multi-purpose area for dining and other activities. The shelter had a commercial kitchen, and all the residents assisted in preparing meals. We passed through another set of secure doors as Darla guided me upstairs to the second floor, where the residences were located. Some rooms were for single occupants, while others had multiple rooms for those who brought children. Darla's residence consisted of 2 small bedrooms, a common room, and a bathroom. It was cozy and comfortable for the 3 of them. We passed through another secure door to the 3rd level, which contained more residential rooms and a large activity area for the children to play. As we entered the play area, both Natalie and Nathan shrieked, "Dalton," and came running toward me. I hugged them tightly, feeling a lump in my throat. The kids gave me a grand tour of their play area, excitedly sharing how much fun they were having at the Cumberland house. I was happy for them, knowing they had other children to play with, but I couldn't help but notice the sheer number of kids there and the fact that the shelter was nearly at capacity. I had been there for nearly 2 hours when Darla was called away to help the other women prepare lunch. The shelter employed 2 full-time cooks, but the residents also contributed to meal preparation and daily cleaning. Most were eager to help, as it provided a distraction from their past experiences. Darla and the kids insisted I stay for lunch. If it had just been Darla asking, I might have said no, but Natalie and Nathan were so thrilled to have me there that I couldn't refuse. The kids sat on either side of me, talking nonstop throughout lunch. Darla sat across from me, mostly eating in silence as she watched us. A wistful look crossed her face, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I couldn't get over how much better she looked compared to our last meeting, but something felt off. This wasn't the right time or place for a serious talk, and frankly, I wasn't sure there was much more to discuss. However, I had one important piece of news to share, and I wanted to wait until it was time to leave before saying anything. Eventually, I had to pry myself away from Natalie and Nathan, who kept begging me to stay just a little longer. I finally said my goodbyes to the kids as Darla led them back upstairs to the playroom. They were initially grumpy about it, but soon became absorbed in playing with their friends and the toys I had brought, an American Girl doll for Natalie and a small train set for Nathan. As Darla escorted me to the secured front entrance, I realized I had felt like I was under a microscope the entire time. Every woman in the place had their eyes on me from the moment I arrived. Some looked at me with fear and mistrust, while others regarded me with curiosity. You know, even though they've been through tough times, they still appreciate a kind-hearted man, Darla said as we reached the front door. I guess I'm not used to that kind of attention, I replied. They've heard a lot about you, Dalton, she said. All good, I hope? I laughed sheepishly. You're one of the few examples of good men that a lot of these women have ever seen. I've done plenty of bragging about you ever since the kids and I moved in here, she said, looking down. I sensed she was waiting for a response, but nothing came to mind until I remembered the reason I had come over. Oh, I almost forgot. The original reason I wanted to stop by was to tell you that Danny called me this morning. Okay, what did he want? He called to tell me that Randy got arrested last night up in Sissel, Montana. Did you know he has a sister up there? Yes, his sister Rhonda lives there. Darla's face lit up with joy, and I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked when she smiled. Well, believe it or not, his sister was the one who called the police and turned him in. She made a silent 911 call. She dialed but didn't answer. Randy thought he was in a safe place, but his sister was waiting for the cops at the front door and led them right to him. Oh my God, that's fantastic. That's so like Rhonda to do something like that. Out of Ree's family, she was the one I was probably closest to. I'm sure she was none too happy when she found out what he did. Yeah, I suppose not, I said, suddenly finding myself lost in her eyes. I forced myself to look away. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know they found him, and he's finally in custody. Thank you so much, Dalton, she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. And thank you for everything you've done for me and the kids. We couldn't have gotten through this without you. I chuckled softly. Let's be honest, Darla, you wouldn't have gotten into this mess if it weren't for me. Dalton, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I'm a big girl, I can take ownership of my choices and responsibilities. I stood in silence for a moment. Well, anyway, I better get going. Thanks for letting me see the kids. I had a great time. I pulled Darla in for a hug, placing my hands on her shoulders to make it less formal and easier to pull away. Darla watched me leave, disappointment evident on her face. She knew as well as I did that I was running away. One benefit of Randy's arrest was that Darla could petition the judge for an immediate divorce. The proceedings had been delayed while he tried to prove himself as a father, but now, with charges of assault, battery, and fleeing, as well as the drunk and disorderly conduct from when I had confronted him, he was likely facing serious consequences. Darla and the kids stayed at the Cumberland house for about another month. Randy was held without bail, which was unusual for anything other than homicide cases, but he had already shown himself to be a flight risk and a danger to Darla and the kids. Butch and Cecilia insisted that Darla and the kids move back in with them. Butch even built 2 bedrooms in the basement for the kids and updated Darla's old room. It had been nearly 2 months since I had seen Darla and the kids. On a Friday night, I was on ambulance standby for the high school football game in Royal Fork. It was early autumn but unseasonably warm. I was working with the usual crew, Jake, Meg, Diana, and Misty. We sat next to the ambulance, waiting for a player to get hurt but hoping it wouldn't happen. The Royal Fork Raiders were down by a touchdown, but as they drove toward the end zone, I noticed smiles spreading across Meg, Diana, and Misty's faces, not because of the game. I looked to my left and saw Darla walking toward us. She wore a sleeveless denim dress and ankle-high boots that made her look effortlessly stylish. As she approached our group, the others greeted her warmly while Jake sat there, clearly surprised. "I could sure use a Coke," Diana said. "Me too," Meg chimed in. "I think I'll go along," added Misty. "Jake, go get a drink," Diana urged. "Nah, I'm all right," he replied, still mesmerized. "Jake, you're thirsty. Get your butt over here and get a drink," Diana exclaimed. Jake finally snapped out of it and reluctantly walked to the concession stand, still stealing glances at Darla. I turned my attention back to the game as Darla took a seat next to me. "I'll give you one thing," I said. "You and the girls sure know how to ambush a guy." "I had to get your attention somehow," Darla replied. I sighed. "What's the point?" "You know what the point is. Dalen, how long are we going to keep avoiding each other? How long until we finally clear the air?" "I'm not avoiding anyone. As far as I'm concerned, there's really nothing else to say. We tried something, it didn't work. You went back to Randy, and that didn't work either. Now we're both single and free to pursue whatever we want." "Really? That's it? It's that simple?" "Well, it sure seemed simple enough the day you left. I wanted you to stay and talk, but you didn't. You ran off and spent the night at Danny's. Don't blow me off, Dalton. We keep making the same mistakes and then think we have the right to punish each other for it. It's time to stop that. We need a clean slate." I laughed. "You think we can just pretend everything that happened didn't? Just start over? Come on, Darla, you can't be that naive." "I'm not naive, Dalton. I'm not going to pretend the last 5 months didn't happen, but the only way to move past it is to talk, something we should have done from the beginning." I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. I think you still have feelings for me, Dalton. And that scares you." "It scares me too because I know I still have feelings for you, but I'm not afraid to face it." "Oh, poor Darla. I'm not a coward. I go into burning buildings for a living. I do things most people can't or won't." "Then prove it. Have the courage to sit down with me and talk everything out." The crowd roared as Royal Fork scored a touchdown, and we paused our conversation until the game resumed. Darla stood up. "Do you work tomorrow, Dalton?" "No," I grumbled. "Back on shift Sunday. I'm going to be at your house tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp. I expect you to be there, awake, dressed, and ready to talk. Maybe have coffee ready?" She turned and walked back toward the bleachers, a little more sway in her step. As she left, I heard Diana's sarcastic remark, "Miss us?" "Like a bad headache," I replied. "You ladies really know how to put on the full court press." "Only when we need to," she shot back. "Well, you can ease up. It's not going to do much good." "Jesus, you're dense. What's it going to hurt to talk to her? Maybe it could help you. I'm not saying everything will be perfect, but maybe you could start over or at least not hate each other." "I don't hate her." "Well, you have a funny way of showing it." You did okay during the ambulance ride. There's more to it than just putting band-aids on wounds. Yeah, well, I wish there were a band-aid for my heart. I got up and headed for the concession stand, needing a Coke of my own. I barely slept that night, knowing Darla and I were going to confront everything in a few hours. By 6 o'clock, I was awake and running on adrenaline. Despite everything, I had never been this nervous around her. She must have felt the same, because she arrived right at 7:50 and let herself in. Most people knock, I said, mildly annoyed. Yeah, well, I'm not most people, she replied, accepting a mug of coffee from me. Cheers, I said in a mock toast. Darla sat down at the table, cupping her mug in her hands. I could tell she was just as tense as I was. We both knew that what was said in the next few minutes or hours would likely define our relationship for years to come. I was fairly certain it would lead us to be anything but a couple, and I worried we might not even remain friends, just distant acquaintances. Well, you wanted to talk, so why don't you go ahead and start? I said. She took a moment to compose herself, her voice soft and hesitant. I remembered how she had been so spirited towards the end of our relationship, right up until she returned to Randy, who had a way of putting her back in line. Dalton, I mean, take your time, Darla. We have all day. Tears began to flow, though she wasn't crying outright. I rolled my eyes slightly, thinking it might be just another attempt to manipulate my feelings. But as she continued, I realized it was genuine. Dalton, I am so sorry for everything. This is my fault, and I'm not just saying that to elicit sympathy. Everything that's happened since I left this house happened because I allowed it to. I let Randy back into my life. I let him manipulate me. I fell back into something familiar, even though the future I had with you was so much brighter. That doesn't make any sense, Darla, I said, confused. She took a deep breath. All my life, men have been drawn to me. It started when I was young. An older boy in the neighborhood took an interest. My father caught him one night outside my window, and he was furious. He confronted the boy's parents, threatening them if he ever saw him near us again. After that, I began to receive attention from boys, but it wasn't always the kind I wanted. Other girls resented me for it, and most of the boys only saw my appearance, not the real me. Every time I dated someone, as soon as we were out of sight of adults, they made advances. It got to the point where I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. I struggled with feelings of sadness and humiliation. I even contemplated the worst escape from it all. Then Randy came along in high school. He said all the right things and made me feel safe. I didn't realize he was manipulating me. He was after the same things everyone else was. He made promises but broke every single one. By the time I understood the truth, I was married with 2 kids, and my future looked bleak. Randy promised things would get better, but he spiraled further into drinking and blaming me and the kids for his problems. I often had to find ways to protect the kids from him when he was in that state. I moved to sit across from her at the table. I know all about your history with Randy, Darla. You've told me how he treated you, but what does that have to do with us? It's because I have a long history of making poor choices. That became the only kind of love I knew. I held on to the belief that things would improve, focusing on the good parts of my life for the sake of my kids. You think that difficulties only happen to other people, and you don't even recognize it when it's happening to you. So, what do you want to happen? What are your expectations from here on out? What I want is to start making better choices in my life instead of the poor ones. I want to finally let go of Randy for good. My lawyer has already petitioned the judge for an immediate end to my marriage, and with Randy in jail, he's not an immediate threat. Okay, I guess that's a start. What's next? Next, Dalton, I want to choose to have you in my life. Ideally, I'd love for us to be together romantically, but I'd even settle for just being your friend, even if I have to watch you with someone else from a distance. But Darla, you had me in your life before, and you still went back to Randy. I have 2 questions for you. First, what assurances do I have that you won't make another poor decision in the future? Second, why me? Now that you're single, you could probably have anyone in town. First of all, Dalton, Randy is history. He will never bother me or my children again. Even if he gets out of prison and somehow manages to gain visitation, he won't ever lay a hand on us in anger. Just in case he does, my father gave me something when the kids and I came home. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small revolver. Whoa, whoa. Okay, put that away. What's the matter, Dalton? Afraid of a little self-defense? She giggled. If Randy ever comes near me again, he'll regret it. I won't shoot to kill, just to defend myself. All right, Annie Oakley, just put it away. Fine, she said, tucking it back. But one of our future dates is definitely going to be at the shooting range. Dad took me there a few weeks ago, and I loved it. Switching gears, I asked, what makes you so sure we're going to date? Can I even compete with Randy? Dalton, Randy is in the past. He doesn't compare to you at all. What he said doesn't matter. Trust me, you are so much more than he ever was. I wasn't sure how to respond. Well, it still bothered me. Come on, Dalton. Please just give me another chance. We'll take it slow, I promise. I'll work hard to regain your trust. Okay, but why me? You could have anyone you want. I want you, Dalton. I deserve you, and you deserve me. For too long, I settled for what everyone else thought I should have. Guys like you always seemed out of reach. That's not true. You're just another example of why good guys finish last. It is true. You're the kind of guy most girls want, but some of us only went for the bad boys because we never thought we had a chance with good ones. I was afraid. I assumed you wouldn't go for someone like me. What did I ever do to give you that impression? You assumed the worst about me. I know it's not fair, but that's how I felt. To tell you the truth, I don't really know myself that well. I don't even know what kind of movies, music, or food I truly like. When I panic, I cling to what's familiar, and that's how I ended up back with Randy. Okay, I said, incredulous. How is it possible that you don't know any of that after 20 years? Whenever we went to the movies, we always saw what Randy liked. On the radio, it was the same, whatever he preferred. When we went out to eat, we went wherever he wanted. To be honest, Dalton, I don't even think I like your spaghetti that much. I just made it because the kids liked it, and I didn't want to upset you. Ouch, that hurt. Really? You don't like my spaghetti? Not really, she said, half crying. I'm really sorry, Dalton. Suddenly, everything began to make sense. Here was a woman who had spent years trying to make everyone else happy. Her sense of self-worth was tied entirely to how those around her perceived her. If Randy and the kids were happy, she felt fulfilled. If Randy praised her, she felt beautiful. If he insulted her, she probably believed it, even though I doubted she ever strayed during their marriage. Darla was like a blank canvas, and for the first time, she had the chance to choose the colors and shapes of her life. As someone once told me, a ship is useless if it's dragging an anchor, and sometimes that anchor must be cut loose, not because it's worthy, but because the ship is. It was time for Darla to set her own course, and she could do that now that Randy was gone for good. She had tasted freedom before and appreciated it even more now, knowing Randy had nothing to offer her or the kids. Do you like Chinese food at least? Dalton, I don't even know if I prefer hamburgers or hot dogs, she said, wiping away her tears. Well, we better figure it out then, because I absolutely love Chinese food. Where are Natalie and Nathan? They're at Mom and Dad's. Let's go get them. Where are we going? She asked as I grabbed a jacket. We're going on a field trip. What kind of field trip? A field trip to discover the real Darla Jones. We drove over to Butch and Cecilia's to pick up the kids. While there, I made Darla pack an overnight bag for herself and the kids. I still had my work duffel in the car, so I was all set with a change of clothes, but I made sure we had swimsuits too. Natalie and Nathan were ecstatic about the impromptu mini vacation. We headed east and eventually caught I-94 into the Twin Cities. I kept the destination a secret and had arranged for a coworker, Neil Boyd, to cover my shift the next day. We arrived in Minneapolis just before noon and headed south into Bloomington, one of the larger suburbs. Our destination was the Mall of America, a place Darla and the kids had never visited, while I had been there numerous times since it opened. Natalie and Nathan were practically bouncing with excitement about the rides, but I told them we had to eat first. We ended up at one of the top-level restaurants, the Imperial Sichuan Palace, a gourmet Chinese restaurant. The aroma was intoxicating as we entered. "Oh my God," Darla exclaimed. "I don't even know what to get." "Some of it looks delicious, but some looks kind of unusual. Why don't you just grab a plate and sample a bit of everything?" I suggested. She nodded, and I chuckled as I watched her carefully consider her options. There were nearly 50 entrees to choose from. Finally, she picked a few items, and we all sat down. The kids loved the chicken on a stick and piled their plates with crab rangoon, which was outstanding. Darla tried bite-sized portions of about 15 different items, but at the end of the meal, it was clear that Chinese food wasn't her favorite. "I'm sorry, Dalton. I just don't think it's for me. Everything is either too spicy or too salty. I know you like this kind of food, but it's just not me." "That's okay," I said. "No big deal. You're not mad, are you?" "Not at all," I assured her. "I mean, aren't you at least glad to know for sure that you don't like Chinese food?" "It's not a crime to have different tastes," Darla responded, reaching across the table to hold my hand. It felt good to look deep into her eyes again, but I knew for both our sakes that we needed to take things slowly. After paying for the meal, we headed back out onto the concourse. Since Darla wasn't thrilled about the Chinese dinner, I suggested we stop by the A&W stand for some root beer floats, which the kids loved. Darla even ordered some onion rings for herself. "Now these I can definitely say I like," she chuckled. It was great to see her smile again, and little by little, I was soaking in the warmth of being with Darla, Natalie, and Nathan. It felt almost like a family again. We spent the rest of the afternoon enjoying every ride in the amusement park located in the middle of the mall. The kids were amazed that such a fantastic place existed. Natalie was tall enough to go on just about every ride, while Nathan got a bit upset about not being able to join in on the bigger ones. However, I managed to sneak him onto Paul Bunyan's log ride, thanks to the chaos of a long line that day. By 6 o'clock, I announced it was time to call it a day, which led to groans of disapproval from the kids. Darla scolded them, reminding them how lucky they were to be out on a weekend. I also told them I had another surprise. We drove just a few blocks north to check into a large suite at the Recent Hotel, home to the Water Park of America, one of the largest indoor water parks in the Midwest. Once we settled into our suite, which had a king-size bed and a sleeper sofa in the main room, with a separate bedroom for the kids featuring bunk beds, we ended up swimming until 10 o'clock. Darla was a bit stressed since the kids were used to being in bed by 9 o'clock at the latest. Exhausted from the long, fun-filled day, the kids fell asleep almost as soon as their heads hit the pillows. Darla protested when I insisted she take the bed while I used the sleeper sofa. "That's absolutely insane. There's more than enough space for both of us," she said. I sighed. "If we're going to reboot this and give it another shot, I think we should take it slow. I don't want us to mess it up again." "Well then, can I at least get a kiss goodnight?" she asked. "Now that I can do." We shared a tender, brief kiss, but Darla leaned in for something more. Instead, I held her in my arms, savoring the warmth of the moment. A few times during the night, I woke up, which seemed to rouse Darla as well. We stared into each other's eyes, and she would rub the space next to her, silently inviting me to join her. Tough as it was, I just smiled and playfully chastised her for trying to break my resolve. "Can't blame a girl for trying," she replied with a giggle. We all slept in late the next morning, and I had even paid for a late checkout. We spent the late morning and afternoon at the Minneapolis Children's Museum. I had originally planned to schedule a jump time at one of the Sky Zones, but I decided against it, not wanting to be too worn out for the drive home. I thought I could save that for a future trip. Besides, we all had a blast with Natalie and Nathan, enjoying the amazing interactive activities at the museum. By the time we returned to Royal Fork that night, it was nearly 9 o'clock, and both kids were fast asleep, requiring us to carry them inside. I felt a bit bad knowing Darla had to work at Callahan the next morning. As I got ready to leave, Darla followed me to my car to see me off. I had barely turned to say goodnight when she grabbed my shirt and pulled me into an unforgettable kiss. I found myself responding in kind, matching her enthusiasm. When she finally pulled back, she breathlessly said, "Keep going, Dalton. I'll be waiting for you at the finish line." "Huh?" I said, a bit taken aback. "You said nice guys never finish first." "I just want you to know that I'm waiting for you, Dalton. No matter how long it takes, I won't give up on you. You deserve to be happy, and so do I. You made me so happy this weekend, and I want more." She pulled me in for another kiss before turning and jogging back into her parents' house, closing the door behind her. All I could do was get in my car and drive home. We kept things casual, or at least as casual as we could, aside from a lot of passionate makeout sessions. That continued through Halloween, but by Thanksgiving, Darla and the kids were back living with me. The fervor and passion of our kisses transitioned into our intimate moments, and the results were truly electrifying. What I thought had been a good intimate life during our first time living together absolutely paled in comparison to what we enjoyed now. Darla was always on my mind, but not in a possessive way. It felt as though we were truly becoming one, as we were meant to. Maybe fate had guided us through this difficult journey to reach this point. I often thought that sometimes we only appreciate the good things after experiencing the tough times, like cherishing sunny days after a week of storms. "I'd give anything to erase those months we were apart," Darla said one night during a candlelight dinner. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking a bite of my steak. Steak was one food we both agreed we loved. "Absolutely. I wonder if it had to happen for us to appreciate what we have now, like some kind of cosmic test. Well, I hope it never happens again. I lost you once, Dalton, and I pray I never lose you again." "You won't, sweetheart." "I love you, Darla." Sometimes I can't hear that enough, Dalton, because even now, I still have trouble believing it. I bet if I asked you to name 10 things you love about me, you'd struggle to come up with them all. Is that a challenge?" I asked playfully. "No, I was just saying." I got up from my seat, knelt next to her, and took her hands in mine. "Darla, I love you. I think I have since the first time we met. I love things about you that you don't even know are lovable. I love the fact that you're a wonderful mother. I love watching you read bedtime stories to the kids and tuck them in at night. You've been their rock during some really tough times. I love your smile, even if you think your teeth are crooked. I love your feet, even if you think they're your worst feature. I even love how uncoordinated you are when painting your toenails, managing to get polish everywhere." Darla giggled at that last one but had tears in her eyes. "I love how it feels lying next to you in bed, wrapped up together. I love that you snore just a little, even though you insist you don't. I admire how hard you work at Callahan's because it's the first real job you've ever had, and you show everyone you can work just as hard as they can. And I love the way you smell when you come home from work, even when you're a bit sweaty. I feel anything but sexy when I get home from Callahan's," she said. "I don't know what it is, but those moments make me desire you even more." "You're weird," she said, leaning in for a kiss. "I love that you think I'm weird and that you have the courage to tell me. I love how you look when you come to bed in one of my t-shirts. I'd rather see you in that than the fanciest lingerie. But most of all, I love that you chose me. I just hope I can live up to it and prove that you made the right decision." "Oh, Dalton," she said, hugging me and crying softly. "You've made me so happy. I want to marry you, Darla. I want you to be my wife and my partner. I want your children to be my children, and I want you to be the mother of our future children. I want to live with you, laugh with you, and even argue with you sometimes, because I know we can handle it and grow stronger through it. Will you have me? Will you make one more good decision and take me as your husband?" "Yes. Oh God, yes. I love you so much. I love you too, soon to be Mrs. Darla Anderson." I didn't give Darla a ring that night. I wanted her to feel empowered in choosing her own path. Instead, I gave her a budget of around $4,000, which surprised us both. This way, she could pick a ring that fit her style and personality, one she'd feel confident wearing for decades. We decided on a fire-themed wedding, where I wore my dress uniform. Danny Larson was my best man, and the groomsmen were all co-workers. Natalie and Nathan served as a junior bridesmaid and ring bearer. After the ceremony at the Methodist church where I grew up, we were whisked away on a beautifully restored open-cab Seagrave fire engine, which belonged to our firefighters union. It had been lovingly restored by our members and once served the Red River Falls Fire Department in the late 1920s and 30s. Darla looked absolutely stunning in a simple silver sleeveless knee-length dress that beautifully highlighted her figure. She might as well have been wearing a sign that read "Danger, curves ahead." Her presence ignited a spark within me that I knew would only be resolved later that night. Darla's side of the bridal party included Diana, Meg, and Misty, with whom she had grown very close. Diana and I had hit a rough patch while Darla and I were on the outs last year. Diana did everything she could to nudge us back together, at least as friends if not more. I hadn't always been very kind to her, especially since she had been there for me right after Darla left. Diana had been one of my closest friends, and I had been too caught up in my own issues to see she was in my corner all along. I helped Darla navigate her way to her seat on the old fire engine, ensuring she wouldn't trip in her heels. Natalie and Nathan stood behind the seat in the hose bed, holding onto the rails. We wouldn't be driving very fast in the old engine. I turned around and waved to all the guests who were blowing bubbles and tossing confetti at us. I spotted Diana standing there with her small bouquet and walked over to give her a big hug. "I love you, you know that, right?" I said into her ear. "I know," was her teary response. "I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you." "Damn right you wouldn't," she said, laughing and hugging me even tighter. "Thank you for everything," I said as I pulled away. "My pleasure. Now go take your wife and kids for a fire truck ride, you perpetual little boy." My wife and kids. Those words felt so good as they rang in my ears. I took Darla's hand as I maneuvered the old engine into the street for our little parade of fire trucks. One of our reserve pumpers and a backup aerial ladder truck from the fire department joined the procession, along with another reserve pumper and a backup tanker from Royal Fork Fire and Rescue, all driven by members of the wedding party. We toured the city, honking and occasionally sounding the sirens, escorted by members of the Mason County Sheriff's Department, courtesy of Sheriff Pat Quinn, who drove his SUV with lights flashing to ensure our convoy had safe passage through intersections. I imagine the Red River PD didn't appreciate our entourage, but I didn't really care. This was our day, and we wanted it to be memorable. Some citizens might complain, but Chief Andy had approved it, as long as we reimbursed the fuel, which was no big deal for a 25 to 30-minute cruise. As we drove down the main drag through Red River Falls, I felt happier and more content than ever. "You know what the best part of all this is, Dalton?" my lovely bride asked. "What's that, my love?" "We've effectively disproven the theory that nice guys finish last." "They don't?" "No, and the icing on the cake is that sometimes even nice girls finish first too. You did it, you kept your promise. Even when I said it wasn't going to be a race, you were patient and waited for me at the finish line, just like you said. It's funny, in a way, you rescue and save people for a living, and you literally saved me." "I'd do anything for you and the kids," I replied, sharing a quick kiss. "I love you, Dalton." "I love you too, Mrs. Anderson." Her new name definitely had a nice ring to it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.